Alright guys, so today we are working on a project that's a little out of my comfort zone, but I wanted to do it and I think it'll come out good. I think it's within my skill set, it's just a little out of my comfort zone. So to preface that, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm kind of learning as I go. So you're probably going to see me make mistakes, but that's how we learn. So let's get into it. So if you've seen my last video, you've seen that I was working on this switch panel for the Subaru, and right in here is where the ashtray is from the factory. I have right here. So this is the cigarette lighter and ashtray that goes there from the factory, and I took that out, did some fabricating to get a switch panel to fit in there. And I also, so if you watched the other video, you would have seen that this got wrapped in carbon fiber. I haven't done that at this point yet, but that's what's going to happen. So if you haven't seen that video, go check it out. I'll put a card up here. So in this video, we are going to be focusing on a secondary part to this project, which is we're going to be making a new shift boot as well as a new emergency brake boot, which I don't have out of the car yet. So I got a few materials to recreate this boot. So what I'm going to be reusing from this is this plastic piece right here, which is how it fastens into this bezel, as well as there's a little plastic collar on the inside here, which I'll show you guys how to take out. And the new materials that I'm using, I'm going to be using, this is Alcantara, which is a synthetic suede. It looks a lot better than suede in my opinion because it's synthetic and it's more consistent and there's no blemishes in it. And it feels nice, and this is what all like BMW, Mercedes, all those guys use on their interiors. And actual Alcantara is a trademark, so this is the real stuff. I bought this from a supplier. And then I got some red upholstery thread, and I'm basically recreating this with that material and that thread. So it's gonna look like this with Alcantara and red stitching to accent all the other red stuff in my car. We're going to be doing that on the emergency brake boot as well. So what I'm going to work on first is removing the this plastic bit right here. So I got to undo these staples to get the leather separated, and then I'm going to basically cut this fabric at the seam to use the old boot as a template to cut the new pieces of fabric so that I can stitch them together and they fit up perfectly and everything works. Alright, one more. There we go. Now this should just come off. There you go. I think it might be glued. Oh yeah, there's some glue. Alright. There's our plastic piece. We gotta save that for the new bezel. And now we have this leather piece with it, which is our template pretty much. And now to get that top one out, like I was telling you, you kind of fold this inside out, and then that'll expose this guy, and you just pull on it, and it's pretty much like tapered on the inside, so it creates a good seam. It just pops out. And then you're left with that. And there you have it. There is our bare boot. So next step is going to be to cut the threaded seam. Now they make special like things for sewing for this, but I don't have it, so I'm just going to use this X-Acto knife and try not to cut my finger off. The skinny back piece and the large front piece. I put some heavy books on top of this overnight to just kind of get it a little flatter, make it easier for me to trace it onto the paper for a template. So I'm going to trace out a template, and I'm going to, this is like a 1/4 inch seam allowance is what they call it. I'm gonna do a 1/2 inch just because I think that'll be easier for me to do. So I'm gonna add a 1/2 inch on these two sides where the stitches are, but the rest I'm just gonna trace directly from the template here. Here is attempt 1, and as you can see, I did this one by hand, so it's not perfect. It's not bad either, but it's just not perfect, and it takes a long time. So with the factory 2-piece design, you have this big piece and this small piece, but this makes it so that you can't use a sewing machine to stitch these edges, and I don't know how they did it from the factory. I don't know how they made these, but it's impossible to put a sewing machine in here because it gets too narrow up here and you can't sew it. So you have to stitch it by hand doing it this way. So I'm going to do another version of this because I have extra material, and I'm going to use a sewing machine this time so I can get the lines nice and straight and perfect. But that means I have to change this design slightly. So I was looking at the emergency brake boot, and if you look at the emergency brake boot, you can see on the back of it, it has the 2 French seams, and then it has this seam up here that's not French seamed, it's just a plain seam. And the reason for that is it's a 3-piece design, so you stitch these 2 French seams while the material is like spread out, so you can use a sewing machine, and then you just flip it inside out and you come through and you do this last seam, just a plain seam, and that's how you get the nice crisp French seams. So I'm going to be using the same technique on this boot. So what I did is I took my old template and I cut this main piece in half. So I'm going to make 2 of these pieces and then another one of these pieces, which is the skinny one, and I'm going to stitch together the 2 pieces to the center piece, French seam both sides, and then once the French seams are done, this part will be split in 2, folded inside out, and then stitch it together, and we'll have a 3-piece boot design, and just the front of the boot in the car, it'll sit like this. It'll sit like this in the car, just the front seam won't be French seam. So it should still look great, and the seams that you'll actually see from the driver's seat will look a lot better, more consistent. This isn't bad, it's just not up to my standards, so we're gonna give that a shot now. Alright, so there's our 3 pieces. These are the outsides. When I cut these 2 pieces, I had to make sure that with one template I had it like one way and then I flipped it over for the other, because if I just did 2 of the exact same things, then we'd have one with an inside and one with an outside. So I wanted the outsides to match. Makes sense, right? So did one mirror image of the other. Okay, so I'm going to try to film this as best I can for you. So I got my 2 pieces right here, and this is the inside and this is the inside, so we have the sides that are going to be showing touching each other, and I have the seams lined up and I have it marked where I need to start my seam allowance at. And this sewing machine right here, this is my mom's sewing machine, and it's probably about as old as me. It moves really fast and I'm not comfortable with it, so I'm just going to use this lever that's on the end right here, and I'm just going to turn that, and that'll do the sewing, but in a more controlled manner for my inexperience. So hopefully we don't mess this up. To get started, I need to do 1 stitch forward, or a couple stitches forward. So there's 1, there's 2, And there's 3. And then I'm gonna hold this button right here that does, it reverses it so that I can do a back stitch. And that basically just locks it in place, locks the stitch. So now I'm just gonna go through here and stitch down this seam. This side looks good, not bad. There was a little mishap going on at the very beginning here. Alright, that one came out much better. Look at that. It's like perfect. This side, not quite perfect, but this isn't the side you see. And it seems to be pretty tight. So I think this will work. So that's what we got so far. Look at that. So now we got to French seam these 2 seams. And then we could do the final stitch. So I'm going to get started on the French seam right now. Okay, so underneath here I have this flap folded down. And I moved the needle to the left so that I could line the edge of the seam up on the edge of the foot here, so that I can keep it straight along with the seam. So let's get started. All right, now take a look at this. It is absolutely perfect. Look at that. Hopefully you can see it on the camera. But that looks beautiful. Perfectly straight. Stitches are perfectly spaced. Looks amazing. So now I need to do this other side, and let me show you the back side. So you can see that flap that we made. This flap right here got folded down, and then it got stitched to the fabric. So that's that stitch that you see is that second stitch that we did. So I just need to do the same thing with this other flap, and then I'm going to do it to this seam as well. I'll be back once I'm done with that, save you some of the repetitiveness, but yeah, let me get that knocked out real quick and I'll show you when it's done. All right guys, I'm very happy with how this turned out. So I got those 2 seams that I was showing you, I got them done on the French seam part. So this is what it looks like. Perfectly stitched, in my opinion. I think this looks great. There is some inconsistencies in like the stitching length, but this is kind of an old junky machine, so I can only do, you know, so much with it. But this is what I got with my limited skill set as well, so not too bad. I like it. I like how it turned out. So, and then the back side's not as pretty as the front side, but it works, you know. And when this is in the car, it's not going to be perfectly flat like this. It's going to be all crinkled up like the old one, so you're not going to be able to see those little inconsistencies. But overall, this looks really good. So the next step is going to be, since these 2 are stitched, fold it over in half and then line these 2 edges up, and I'm going to run a stitch all the way across here, and then the boot will be done. Alright, so here's the last stitch as I showed you. Now I flipped it right side, and that's what the front seam looks like. So just a normal seam, and then we have our 2 perfect French seams. So that's how it is. I'm probably going to put some contact cement on these flaps to glue them down so they don't get in the way. But yeah, that's going to be it. And next thing to do is going to be to put it back on the factory bezel, which I'll show you how to do in just a second. All right, so here's that collar that goes around here that the shift knob slides into. Now in order to get this back on, what you're going to do is I cut some slits in there like the OEM boot, and And you basically just tuck the end into there, like so, and then kind of hold on to it as you turn it inside out. And then all right, just like that. Now the shifter can slide in there and it'll hold that in its position. Now we need to put the base back on there. Okay, so I went through and I cut these notches where all these pieces stand out, just so I can get it to sit flat. So now I'm gonna go through and staple everything. So I'm gonna use these clips to mock it up. Alright, so I got it, but it was just a little bit of a lengthy process of just pressing staples through those holes, and I put them in backwards because that's the only way I could fix. So now I am going to do the same exact thing with the e-brake boot, and I'll be back when I'm done with that. Alright, so here is the finished product. Let me get it in better lighting. So there we have it. Finished product. Lots of stitches on this one. I kind of made a mistake when I was cutting out my templates. So I just sewed this onto here. So that's not a normal seam right there. And then this kind of folds over weird. But basically the next step is going to be to glue it onto this framework piece right here. So I'm going to use some contact cement and just glue everything onto here. So here's the finished shift boot in the car, and the finished emergency brake boot. And let me put this down so you can see. It looks real nice. The shifter, it's a shift boot, you know, it looks good too. Yeah, I surprised myself with this project. I didn't know I could sew like this, but it came out really nice, so I'm quite happy with that. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like down below. If you have any questions, put them in the comments down below. If you know somebody who might like this video, please share it with them. If you aren't subscribed, please consider subscribing. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.